confessions that implicate the broadcasts from the United States.
Right.
Do you have a sense of how that would be reacted to? Would it be, is there a way to gauge the percentages of people who would believe this and who would think it's simply farcical and self-supporting by the state?
A lot of people don't believe the state television. Absolutely. They're sophisticated. Iranians are very sophisticated. They don't necessarily, but there will be some people who do. Every piece of evidence that they can provide, and they don't really believe a televised confession, but every other piece of evidence they can provide will be accepted by a portion. We have to remember, as you pointed out, these demonstrations were, as Obama pointed out as well, that these demonstrations were across the socioeconomic scale. Everybody was demonstrating in the initial days after the election. They weren't demonstrating to overthrow the government. They were demonstrating to protest what they thought was a fraudulent vote. It's legitimate, and Mousavi, the opposition candidate, wasn't asking for the government to be overthrown. He was just asking for the vote to be a real vote, and therefore he was asking for a revote. And to get that scale of protest, to get that many people, to get women in chadors, men, bearded men, men who are Western-looking, students, old people, all those people to come out in the streets, if there was any idea, if there was any notion that this was being manipulated by the West, they won't get those people. A lot of those people will start being peeled off.
You said that the numbers are certainly declining. Richard Engel had postulated that this was, and the evidence suggested that this was morphing into some attempt to keep a semi-permanent protest or dissent form viable without getting people killed on the streets. Is that where it's going now?
Well, I think as long as Mousavi keeps up the fight, and he's been silent today, but as long as he is saying that he is not accepting what the Guardian Council is saying, at least, well, they haven't actually made a definitive decision yet, and they've actually extended it now, the period. They were going to tomorrow, Wednesday. They've extended it to Monday, when they're going to give their final decision. Depending on what that final decision is, if that final decision is to certify the election with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as president, it depends on what Mousavi says. The leader of this movement has to come out one way or another. Either he has to accept it or not. And if he doesn't accept it and continues the protest or continues to ask his supporters to protest peacefully however they can, I think it will continue for a long time, yes. But I think they won't go out on the streets the way they have been going because the government's been very good at dispersing those protests.
Indeed it has. Human Maj, the author of The Ayatollah Begs to Differ, The Paradox of Modern Iran. Great, thanks for your time. Pleasure to meet you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Every politician analogizes his career to a journey, but in Governor Mark Sanford's case, this is ridiculous. Whereabouts unknown to his state or his family for more than 4 days, then the revelation that he was hiking the Appalachian Trail. His wife said he needed to get away from the kids on Father's Day weekend. Unclear who might have known that Sunday was also National Hike Naked Day. And incidentally, he has now been reported seen boarding a flight in Atlanta. His office flat out denies that. Our third story, this is the best story you could come up with. This morning, the governor finally called his chief of staff, after which his office issued this prepared statement. It would be fair to say the governor was somewhat taken aback by all of the interest this trip has gotten. Given the circumstances and the attention this trip has garnered, the governor communicated to us that he plans on returning to the office tomorrow. Governor Sanford's trek began after the South Carolina legislative session ended on Thursday. He reportedly left the governor's mansion, jumped in a black SUV, and took off, unaccompanied by security. No one seemed to know where he went. He did not even tell the lieutenant governor, fellow Republican Andre Bauer.
The real concern with state government is just making sure that our CEO of our state can be contacted should there be a problem, anything like a prison outbreak, something where immediately somebody had to make a definitive decision on the course of action at hand, and that would be our governor.
Just to ratchet this up a notch, Governor Sanford infamously made a big show earlier this year of refusing the stimulus money for his state. He was then forced to take it by the state's Supreme Court. Stimulus money that includes more than $600,000 to fix up the Appalachian Trail. Time to call in MSNBC political analyst, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post, Eugene Robinson. Gene, good evening.
Evening, Keith.
Do we have any idea yet which this is? Is this a famous disappearing governor like Earl Long who would, turn up later on in an asylum or with a stripper? Or is this just a governor who somehow does not get that the governor can take time off, but he's not supposed to vanish without telling anybody where they can find him?
Well, we don't know yet. I mean, we don't know if it's one or the other or both or neither or it's weird. It's very unusual. Hiking a 5-day hike on the Appalachian Trail is is usually not something you do on a whim. You know, shall I go to Starbucks or shall I hike the Appalachian Trail for 5 days? I mean, it's you know, you need equipment. You have to kind of organize it. You have to, you know, plot out a route and know where you're going, and it's a logistical exercise that people around you, it seems to me, couldn't help but notice. Like, dear, why are you packing that bedroll? Dear, what are you doing with the camp stove? And apparently nobody saw any of that. So I just don't think we know this whole story yet. I hope we find it out more soon.
Do we need to know? I mean, I assume there's some wild card third option, like he was negotiating with the Ayatollahs in Iran. Mm-hmm. But if it's not something like that, regardless of what those two extremes might be, the actual truth, did the governor just sort of blow a hole in his not-too-secret presidential aspirations?
I think he did. I mean, you know, you can't say at this early date that any damage is irreparable. But one thing you cannot seem to be, if you want to be president, is flaky and erratic. And this seems to have been arguably a pretty flaky and erratic thing to do, or at least the way he seems to have done it. The other thing is, haven't we been lectured by Republicans about, you know, the realities of the post 9/11 world and the need for constant vigilance, and so here he has just pretended that it's I guess September 10th and just kind of flits off as chief executive of the state. That just doesn't mesh with the message the party's trying to send.
Additionally, you have no idea whether or not there are terrorist cells along the Appalachian Trail.
Well,
I mean, they could
have
picked him off and held him for upwards of $10,000 ransom right there.
They could have. I think they made a movie, Deliverance, but never mind.
Well, all right. This is your home state. Are all the politicians like this?
No. You know, as a journalist, one could wish, but no, they're not all like this. Although, you know, politics in South Carolina have always been kind of peculiar, and we've had interesting, you know, some larger-than-life characters. Obviously, Strom Thurmond is one example. South Carolina's big Revolutionary War hero was a man named Francis Marion, whose nickname was the Swamp Fox. I mean, that kind of gives you a sense of he was a guerrilla warrior, actually, and ahead of his time. It's just an odd place. I got to say, this is the oddest governor South Carolina has had in some time.
Last odd part about this, maybe ultimately this might be the oddest, the statement. Well, the governor was taken aback by the interest in this trip. The governor, nobody knew where he was. He was, for all intents and purposes, missing. Is there a certain political tone deafness to issuing a statement that says, well, I don't know what you're making such a big deal about?
Well, that's not just political tone deafness. I mean, you know, there's reality, and then there's wherever that statement came from. Because in fact, you know, anybody is missing for 5 days. You know, people want to know what happened. They get worried. Where were you? Why didn't you call? Why didn't you write? You know, and so that's that again. Look, maybe we'll learn more about this story. I don't think we got the whole story yet.
Yeah. Well, Governor, when we said take a hike, we didn't mean it literally. Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist of the Washington Post, from South Carolina, but it's not his fault either. Great, thanks, Gene.
Good to be here, Keith.